Hello and welcome to part 2 of this video series featuring IBM Voice Gateway. In part 1 we had an introduction to Voice Gateway and looked at ways we could extend the usefulness of Voice Gateway by integrating the voice capabilities with other systems. We finished part 1 with a demonstration where I showed Voice Gateway gathering information from a customer before giving them a tailored life insurance quote that was calculated in an external system. In this part, we'll provision a Voice Gateway on IBM Cloud and connect it to a very simple conversation that we'll build in Watson Conversation. We'll configure an SIP trunk so we can use our phone to call into the service, and we'll finish up by building a simple service orchestration engine in NodeRed and looking at some of the debug output it produces. If you want to follow along and build your own Voice Gateway, you'll need a pay-as-you-go IBM Cloud account, not the standard or free account. The upgrade shouldn't cost you anything, nor will we incur any charges with anything we build, but you'll need to provide a credit card as part of the upgrade process. We need to use a pay-as-you-go account because the Voice Gateway service on IBM Cloud is still experimental, and therefore it's only available to the premium accounts. An alternative would be to download Voice Gateway from GitHub. It's free for development use, and it's packaged in a couple of Docker containers. Maybe I'll do a bonus video showing how to set up the containerized Voice Gateway distribution, but for most users the service on IBM Cloud is easy to get started with and it's free too. You just need to provide your credit card to give access to the premium services. In order to make phone calls into our Voice Gateway, you're going to need a SIP trunk. I'm using a free Twilio account as this comes with a small balance that will be sufficient for our purposes here. I'll show the Twilio configuration too. So this is what we're going to build. Starting at the bottom, we'll set up the 3 Watson services that Voice Gateway needs. Next, we'll provision the Voice Gateway service before coming out of IBM Cloud to do the SIP setup using Twilio. Then we're back into IBM Cloud to finish up the Voice Gateway configuration. Finally, we'll build the service orchestration engine in NodeRed and integrate that into our stack. So starting from an empty IBM Cloud account, I'm creating my services in the US South region. I've created a Cloud Foundry organization called Gerry Dev, and I've created a space within that organization called VGW Demo. So we need to create our 3 base Watson services. Okay, so let's go into the catalog. We'll filter the catalog contents with the Watson keyword, and then we'll scroll down and we'll find the Watson services. And here's the first one we need, speech to text. Then we've got text to speech and conversation. So I'm going to create a speech to text service. I'm going to switch over to the correct region. Correct organization, and there's the space. And we'll just leave the name as generated. Okay, so that's provisioning the service. Okay, now what we're going to do is create some credentials for this service so that when we create the Voice Gateway, we've got a means for the Voice Gateway service to authenticate against this service. So we'll just create those now, just accept the defaults, and it'll create a set of credentials for us. So back to the catalog. Let's do text to speech this time. Set the region. Choose the correct organization and the correct space. Okay, again we'll have to create some credentials for this. Okay, and that's done. So back to the catalog to create the conversation service. So I'll select the correct organization, create the service, create the credentials. Okay, so that's our 3 basic Watson services set up. The next thing we'll do is we'll actually create a conversation in here. So back in the Manage tab here, you'll find a button on the screen called Launch Tool. And this will launch the Watson Conversation development tools. Now I'm going to create a new workspace, and I'm going to call this Voice Pizza. Okay, so we're just going to create a very simple conversation that will allow us to test all the services that we're standing up here. Basically, we want to be able to phone this service up and have a brief, albeit simple conversation with it, just to test that everything is working. So I'm going to create a very simple conversation. I'm going to add an intent here. Hello. I'll provide some examples of what hello sounds like. So hello, or hi, or good morning. Okay, and then I'm going to create another intent. Pizza info. Let's give some examples of this intent. Tell me about pizza, or what is pizza? Okay, so 2 basic intents. The next thing we'll do is we'll create a simple dialog for this, and we'll use the existing skeleton that's provided for us, and we'll say for welcome, if the bot recognizes our hello intent, then we'll say hi, welcome to the pizza information service. Okay, then we'll add another dialog node, and we'll call this one pizza info. And if the bot recognizes the pizza info intent, then we will respond with I have lots of information on pizza. Pizza is a bread-based food. Mostly flat. Okay, you get the idea. All right. That's pretty good. We can test this briefly just using the tools inside Watson. So if we bring up the test tool, we can say hello, and Watson has recognized the hello intent and has responded with the text that we entered for the hello response. Let's see if we can trigger the pizza info intent, or the pizza info dialog. Tell me about pizza. There we are. So, a basic conversation. So from here, what we're going to do is create the Voice Gateway service. So we're going to switch back into the other tab. We're going to come out of the Watson Conversation Tools for a bit, and back into my dashboard. You see we've got the 3 basic Watson services set up here. So let's go back into the catalog and create the Voice Gateway service. Now you won't find it on the main catalog page, but if you scroll all the way to the bottom you will see these experimental services, and here is Voice Agent with Watson under the Application Services group. Now the eagle-eyed amongst you may have noticed that this service on IBM Cloud is called Voice Agent with Watson, not Voice Gateway. You'll just have to trust me, it's basically the same as the containerized Voice Gateway, but it's just easier to configure and get started with. So I'm going to create an instance of one of these. Once it comes up with the region. Okay, and I'm going to click on the Create button. Creating the Voice Agent service will give us the SIP address, which we'll need before we can do the Twilio setup. So we've got to do this step first. Okay, and this is the SIP URI. We'll have to enter this into Twilio. So that's all we're going to set up with Voice Agent right now. We're just going to copy this into the clipboard, or just leave it here in this tab while we do the Twilio stuff. Okay, so if you go onto the Twilio website, sign up for a trial, you'll get to a point where it asks you to create a new project. So let's provide a name for this project. Okay, let's create the project. Okay, let's skip this part. So now we have a basic project in Twilio. Before we can do much else, we'll need to verify a telephone number to Twilio. So I'm going to do that now. And verify a number. I'll go for the text option. And I'll put in my telephone number. So I've got my verification code. Okay, so we're good. And let's get started and create the trunk. So let's scroll down here. Here we have Elastic SIP trunking. We're going to create an SIP trunk. Let's call it Demo Trunk. Okay, now we only need to provide two things for the trunk to work. The first is the origination URI, which is what we'll get from Voice Agent, and then we'll buy a number. So let's do the number first. I'll search for a number near where I am. Okay, let's go for this one. And I'll buy that number. So this number is now allocated to the trunk. Let's provide the origination URI for Voice Gateway. So I'm going to jump into a different tab, back into Voice Agent, and I'm going to copy this URI here. Get back into Twilio and enter that number, or enter that address. Okay, and before I come out of Twilio, I'm just going to take a note of this number. Okay, that should be the Twilio configuration completed. So here we are back in IBM Cloud in the Voice Agent landing page. So I'm going to go to the Manage tab, and we can see that we actually have no voice agents up. I'm going to add a voice agent. We'll just wait for the form to populate. The form allows us to select the conversation, the speech to text, and the text to speech services that we have in our cloud account. But as we've only got one example of each, the form has already defaulted to them and has picked up their default credentials. Back up to conversation, we can see that it's picked out the service instance, the credentials, and also the workspace name, because we've only got one workspace in a conversation instance. So let's name our agent, my demo agent. I'm going to paste in the Twilio phone number, and that's it. Let's create that agent. Okay, we're just about ready to give this service a call and see how it responds. Before we do, let's just go back into Watson Conversation and run the test tool again. So we can see as soon as we open the conversation with Watson, we get "I didn't understand, you could try rephrasing." Basically, we haven't provided any input, so Watson doesn't know what we're asking for. So we can say "hello," and it will say, respond, "Welcome to the Pizza Information Service," and let's say what is pizza? Okay, so that's the basic conversation structure that we had in Watson. Let's see if we can get a similar response through the Voice Gateway. So let's give that a call.
I didn't understand. You can try rephrasing.
Oh, hello.
Hi, welcome to the Pizza Information Service.
What is pizza?
I have lots of information on pizza. Pizza is a bread-based food, mostly flat.
Great, okay, thank you. Okay, so we're getting the same output through Voice Gateway as we are through the Watson tools directly, but we're going to make a couple of tweaks. When we phone up, we want to hear a greeting. We don't want to hear "I didn't understand, you can try rephrasing." So we're going to make some changes to the Watson conversation to make this a little bit more natural. So all we need to do is change the trigger to the welcome dialog. So I'm going to add in another trigger here. So it'll be hello or the system welcome trigger. Okay, so that's done. We can test that here. Let's clear that, and now we see the first response from Watson is the welcome. Now we can try that straight away in Voice Gateway, make a call again.
Hi, welcome to the Pizza Information Service.
Oh, tell me about pizza.
I have lots of information on pizza. Pizza is a bread-based food, mostly flat.
Okay, so the last thing that we're going to do in part 2 is to interject a service orchestration engine between our Voice Gateway agent and our conversation service. So I'm going to go into the Cloud Catalog and I'm going to filter on the word red, because I'm going to implement my service orchestration engine using a NodeRed flow. So this is the NodeRed starter that I'm going to use, and let's create a XYZ VGW SOE, and we'll create that in US South, in my dev space, and in the, yeah, great. Okay, so let's kick that off. That will provision the NodeRed. It'll do quite a lot of startup stuff and first time setup, so we'll wait for this to provision and then we will get into the NodeRed flow. Okay, so after a few minutes, this little icon here will change and it will show you that the NodeRed app is actually running. So if we visit the app URL, it'll take us through the initialization of the NodeRed flow, and it'll ask us to provide a username and a password. Okay, and just click next. Alright, so that's NodeRed started. Let's get our flow editor up. Okay, so this is where we're going to create the first cut of the service orchestration engine. Now, it's important to realize that this is just sitting between Voice Gateway and conversation. At its very simplest, it's just passing through. It doesn't need to do anything. Okay, so what do we need? Well, first of all, we need to expose a HTTP endpoint for Voice Gateway to call our service orchestration engine. So I've dragged the HTTP input onto the flow editor. If I double click that, I'm going to change this over to a post, and I'm going to give it a URL. This URL will sit on the end of the NodeRed URL, which is here. This URL is specific to my NodeRed service. Okay, so that will expose that endpoint. The next thing we're going to do is connect it to conversation. Now if you scroll down, you will find a conversation node. Okay, so double click that, and this will ask us to provide credentials and Workspace ID for our Watson conversation. So let's go back into our dashboard. Here we see we've got the new Cloud Foundry app, which is the NodeRed app, but we want the credentials from conversation. So service credentials, let's view the credentials, and here we have the username and password. So I'm going to copy the username and paste that into the NodeRed username, or rather the username for the credentials for conversation in NodeRed, and do the same thing for the password. Okay, the next thing we need is the Workspace ID. So back in conversation, you can see that when you go into your workspaces, there are these three little dots here. If you click on here and click on View Details, you can see the Workspace ID. So let's copy that, paste that into the Workspace ID in NodeRed. Okay, so that's that configured. We're going to need a HTTP output. There we are. And I'm going to start connecting these up. Now, theoretically, at least, it's that simple, but there's just one thing we need to do here in between the input of the message and calling conversation. Okay, so what we need to do is put a function between the input and the call to conversation. The function will handle some of the parameter mapping between Voice Gateway and the conversation node. We'll also provide some default input, as right now the conversation node can't handle an empty payload. So I'm going to open up the function editor, handle, I'll call this handle VGW input. And the code that we need, I'm just going to paste this in and then walk through it. So in lines 1 to 3, we're copying the conversation context from Voice Gateway, which is stored in message.payload.context, and we're going to put it into a new variable called message.params.context that the conversation node expects. Here on line 6, we're inserting a new variable into the context that increases the Voice Gateway timeout. On lines 9 to 12, we copy the output from speech to text that's held in the variable called message.payload.inputText and copy that into a variable called message.payload that the conversation node expects. If there is no input from speech to text, then we'll just put hello in there to trigger the conversation. On line 15, we make sure that the message.payload variable isn't empty, and if it is, we'll put hello in there. Now these mappings might be tidied up in a subsequent version of conversation, but for now we just need to do them manually. So the flow is almost ready. It's handy to put a couple of debug nodes on here. So we'll connect the input message to a debug node. So this is, we'll call this input, and then we'll do another one which shows the output. Okay, so let's deploy that. So that's the NodeRed flow deployed in our NodeRed runtime, and the next step is to connect Voice Gateway to this input URL. Okay, so let's make a note of this URL. Let's copy it into the clipboard. And then let's go into our Voice Gateway and point it at the service orchestration engine we've just created. Okay, so here's the demo agent that we created earlier. When we created it, it was pointing directly at Watson Conversation. So we're going to change that now and point it at our service orchestration engine. So it's wanting a URL for that. So let's provide the beginning, and the last part was my pizza SOE. Okay. Let's save that configuration. And now conversation will be passing, or rather our Voice Gateway agent will be passing all of the traffic that's going into conversation through our SOE first. So back in the NodeRed flow, we've got nothing in the debug output because there's no traffic coming in. Okay, let's give this a call. One thing to watch out for is the debug output that will start to appear once the conversation is underway.
Hi, welcome to the Pizza Information Service.
Tell me about pizza.
I have lots of information on pizza. Pizza is a bread-based food, mostly flat.
Thanks. Okay, so let's have a look. The first thing that we're going to inspect is the output from the input. So if we look over here, here is the output that's come from that node, and it's helpfully highlighted it here. So if we look at the input text, here we see, tell me about pizza. This is what I said. And then if we look at the output node that's come after conversation was called, we'll see some text. And here is the output from conversation, which is passed into the speech synthesizer. Okay, so that's our basic pass-through SOE completed, and we'll add to this in the next video. So we've come quite a long way in the last half hour. We've created the 3 Watson services that we needed. We've created the voice gateway, we've configured the Twilio trunk, then we had a quick test, then we created the service orchestration engine in NodeRed, and then incorporated that into our configuration. And we saw some of the debug output that was available. So that concludes part 2. In part 3, we're going to smooth off some of the rough edges, we'll improve the performance of some of the Watson services, and we'll make the speech a little bit more natural. We will use a different conversation. We'll use the life insurance example. It has a few more complex characteristics that we can explore. And we'll also look at integrating our service orchestration engine with an external quotation service, this time running in IBM's Operational Decision Manager. But we'll also have a simple flow in NodeRed that we can use as a substitute. So until then, thank you for watching.